A few months ago, my family bought me a small home coffee roaster, the Fresh Roast SR540. It's a great little roaster. I did a review on it. You can check out that review right here. The conclusion is that it's a win-win-win all the way around. I really enjoyed the coffee roaster, but it did have some areas that I thought could be improved. One of them was the fan velocity, the amount of air that could be moved with the fan. And to my surprise and my pleasure, I learned that the manufacturer offers an extension tube. This accessory allows more air velocity to take place in the roasting chamber during the roast, and I get a more even roast with my coffee. So what we're going to do today is talk about the extension tube. We're going to show you how to put this thing together, and we're going to do a roast together. So let's get going. The SR540 comes with four main parts. The first is the base, that's in the middle, and then the second is the roasting chamber along with its threaded base, and then the lid, which is the chaff collector. And the stock model works great, as I've mentioned, but when you add the extension tube, it really changes the roaster. And the extension tube is kind of weird to put on unless you've had somebody show you how to put it on, or you've seen it maybe in a video somewhere. So I'm going to share this with you just because it might be helpful if you ever decide to get an extension tube. The extension tube comes with four rings. The first one is a larger ring, and you want to slide this over the narrow part of the extension tube with the channel on the rubber ring facing downward towards the bottom of the narrow tube. You want to slide that all the way up this narrow part of the extension tube as far as you can until it starts to taper and get wider. And then, yeah, that's as far as that's going to go. That ring is going to seat in with the stock roasting chamber. You'll see that here in just a minute. Next, you've got three small rings, and these rings are going to go on the very bottom of the roasting extension tube. They're going to go on the very bottom of the extension tube. You put one on at a time, and you want to make sure that these are flush with the bottom of the extension tube. After you put the first one on, you put the second one on top of the first one, and again you make sure that they're aligned properly, that they are flush with each other and flush with the end of the glass as seen here in the video. And then you'll go ahead and do the same thing with the third ring, getting that on as well. Why are we putting these rings on the bottom of this extension tube? We're doing that so that we can get a really good seal to keep air from escaping and going between the extension tube and the roasting chamber itself. So you'll see we flip this extension tube upside down after we've got all the rings seated properly, and we are going to insert that into the roasting chamber. First, let's get the roasting chamber together. We'll go ahead and put the base on. It's a quarter turn, and that just turns onto the bottom of the glass roasting chamber, the stock one. And then once that's together, you set that down and you carefully slide straight down the extension tube, and you'll see that the rubber rings that are in there seat at the very bottom of that alloy part, so that no air is going to get between the extension tube and the roasting chamber. There's like a quarter-inch or a half-inch gap, more like a quarter-inch gap that's between the two pieces of glass. You want to make sure that that's sealed really well. And then you're going to want to push down the top ring and seat that channel into the roasting chamber to make sure that that is sealed completely tight. After, when you first start to use this, the first roast or two, you may need to keep seating down that top ring, but then after you do that, you won't have to fiddle with it anymore. And that's it. You've got an extension tube. Take a look at how narrow this is now compared to the stock size that you see on the outside. There's a good quarter-inch there at least, and just that difference in itself is going to constrict the air and allow that air to move quickly through the roasting chamber, and you're going to see a very clear difference between the stock air movement with the stock roasting chamber and then the extension tube air movement. It's quite something. So let's take a look at that now, so you'll be able to see very clearly side by side the difference between one SR540 with an extension tube and one without. All right, we're going to put in 140 grams of a Kenyan pea berry into both of these roasting chambers. The one on the left is the stock, the one on the right is the extension tube. We're going to just use the cool mode here because I don't want these beans to start getting warmed up, but we're going to use a fan setting of 9. So this is a full fan setting. Here we go, and you can see the bean movement is minimal in the stock unit, and it causes a real uneven roast. But the extension tube, at the heaviest these beans are going to get, you see some really good bean movement already. All right, we've got 140 grams put in the SR540 with the extension tube, and I've got a timer set up here that I'm going to be using to help me stay on track. My goal as we start this roast is to have a roast that's going to be about an 8.5 minute roast total time. We're going to have the fans, as you can see the roast has started. We're going to have the fan setting at its highest right now to get that good bean movement, and we're going to be using the lowest heat setting, it's at a 1, and we're going to be slowly increasing along the way the temperature, the heat temperature. By the time we get to dry, we should be around a 5, I think, for the temperature setting, or maybe even a 6. All right, so here we are about 30 seconds into the roast, and I've already started to make temperature changes. You'll see I moved it to a 2. So how do I determine, or how am I going to know that I can reach dry at 4 minutes? Well, I'm using heat, and I'm using my sight to be able to watch the color of the coffee, so I can time that event and time that color progression so that just as it turns yellow, I've reached the 4 minute mark. You'll notice in this video that I am not referencing a temperature once in this video. And I'm okay with that, because I know that as I apply heat, the beans are going to show me what's happening. I'm going to be able to smell what's happening with the beans, and I'm going to be able to see what's happening with the beans, so that I don't necessarily have to have a temperature gauge to be able to do this. In one of my past videos, I think my very first video with the SR540 was the review, and I don't even think I remembered knowing that there was a temperature measurement setting on this roaster at all. If you were to turn the dial right now, just kind of twist it quick, it would display a temperature. But I don't need that. I'm not using that in this roast. If you're using temperatures with your SR540 and they're helping you, awesome. We're going to be doing a video about temperatures with the SR540. In the next few videos, you'll start to see some of that come out, and it'll be really interesting to see what's happening, what's really displaying for temperatures. So we're already progressing to a 3 with our heat. Look at the bean movement that's going on here. The beans are already starting to pale a little bit, and we're about 2.5 minutes into our roast. So I know that the temperature, the heat that is being blown all over these beans is influencing, it's beginning to roast the coffee. It's drying the coffee up. The moisture is starting to leave the beans little by little, and that's another reason why the beans are starting to go higher in the roast chamber. Less moisture means lighter weight, means more higher elevation, higher lofting inside of the roasting chamber. All right, we've increased our heat to a 4, and we're going to be introducing more heat here in just a minute. We're about a minute away from dry, and we are starting to see some yellowing going on in the roasting chamber. We're going to increase that to 5 here in just a second. And then we're also going to start to lower the fan, because I've got 45 seconds basically to hit my mark, and I want to be sure that these beans get enough heat to be able to get to yellow. Here they're becoming more yellow. I've increased to a 5, and I've lowered my fan just now to an 8. By lowering the fan, that creates more heat within the roasting chamber. Less of that heat is being blown out the top through the chaff collector. And yeah, so we're getting really close to yellow right now, and I'm just about to call it, and I think I'm going to be changing the heat to a 6 too, because I've got to get this coffee moving now towards first crack. So yeah, we're at yellow. I've just marked it there. We got a 43% dry phase, and we're targeting a 38% browning phase. So that means that around 6 minutes and 30 seconds, 6:35, somewhere around there, I'm targeting first crack. So I need to get my beans from that yellow state that we were just at. Now we're already, you can see that they're in browning now. I need to get those beans to a color which I know is going to be very close to first crack. So I'm visually watching the color of the beans. You can see I've already applied more heat because I need to get this moving, and we're at full heat right now. And the fan eventually is going to get, there it is, I just moved it down to a 7. So I need to have this roast progress, because we have now about a minute and a half left to get to first crack. And the only way I can do that is by increasing the heat and also lowering the fan speed. The coffee's still drying, it's getting lofted higher, and so I need to make sure that the coffee doesn't get too high. It also helps me create more heat in the roasting chamber, as I mentioned, to lower the fan speed. So how do I know that this coffee, how do I know the phases, the phase percentages I want to use for this coffee? Well, I don't. I'm roasting a Kenyan pea berry. I know it's a very high density coffee, and I know that it can handle a lot of heat, and I know that I'm going to have to apply a lot of heat to have a roast that's 8.5 minutes or less, and so that's what I'm doing. I chose these phase percentages because I felt I could go with a shorter dry phase than 50%, so maybe closer to 40%. And I think that this coffee with a little longer browning phase, because I'm going to have a shorter development phase, I should kind of highlight the acidity in this coffee. That's kind of my plan. That's my thinking as I roast this coffee, but we'll find out. You know, this coffee's got some great fruity notes. There's a red grapefruit note in here, and there's a grape note. There's an underlying sweetness. So there's some fruit in this cup that I want to be able to highlight and draw out. Okay, so first crack is about to happen. We can start to hear it. Yep, there's first crack. And I have lowered my fan. I'm continuing to lower my fan speed to create this heat. Now, once I hit first crack, what I don't want to do, I don't want to just keep pouring on the heat. And so I'm going to be making some adjustments to that here, but I want to get a nice rolling crack, and then I'm going to start to back things down, and that's what I'm doing here right now. I am starting to slow things down. So I've lowered my heat to 8, lowered the fan to 5 because it was really lofting. But I've got about a minute and a half, so I want this crack. I don't want it to stall, but I don't want it to go so fast that it's going to shoot into second crack. So it's kind of a timing thing, and you just have to listen to the pace of your crack to determine, you know, how fast it's moving. I've already backed the temperature down to a 7 now, and I'm going to start to think about when and how I'm going to get this coffee out of the roaster. I don't like to use the cool, I mean, this has a great cool system on it. So it cools the coffee a lot quicker than the Be-More, but not quick enough for me. So I do something probably different than a lot of people. I just take the chaff collector off right off the top, and I just dump the coffee into this cooling tray that you see here. There's my roast, and I'm going to dump that right now and get that out of the roasting chamber so that we can, get this coffee cooling down quick. So there it is, out of the roasting chamber. You saw some of the chaff fly all over the place. That's okay. And get it onto the cooling tray as quick as possible. All right, it's been a few days since I roasted the coffee you just saw here on the video, and I'm getting ready to go in for the taste. But before I do that, I wanted to point out a few things. I mentioned a little bit of it in my narration, and that is that the extension tube is a great accessory if you're looking for a more even roast and even to increase the capacity of the coffee that you roast. So instead of roasting just 120 grams of coffee or less to try to get that evenness in the standard roasting chamber, you can roast 140 grams like I did. Some people roast even more than that on the 540, and they've had some good results. So you can roast a little bit more coffee with the extension tube. Not only does it give you more velocity, so more air movement, more bean lofting, and that even roast that we all want, but it also increases temperatures. Because of that narrow, restricted area for the roasting chamber, it has higher temperatures. Now, I haven't measured the difference in temperature between the stock and the extension tube, but I can say that it does give me the ability to have a pretty short dry phase if I wanted to do that. And I really don't want to have a super short dry phase. So I have had people share with me, and I'm not sure if it was the 540 or the 800, but they're using extension tubes that maybe cause their roasts to be a little shorter than they want. They'll have the lowest heat setting, but the roast moves a little quicker than they would like, so they don't have the luxury of being able to slow that roast down that much. So I haven't experienced that problem myself. With the 540, it's worked out just great for me. They may have been referring to the 800, I don't remember. But I'm very happy with the extension tube. Have no issues with heat adjustments for this roaster. One of the disadvantages to the extension tube is that it's fragile. The roasting chamber in general is fragile, but when you go to clean it, you've got to be very careful taking that apart. It is finicky. I showed a picture a couple months ago where I broke my roasting chamber, the outer cup, because I was finagling with the extension tube, and I kind of tilted it on an angle, and it broke the glass of the roasting chamber, the cup. So I had to order a new one. So you need to be careful when you go ahead and install that and or take it apart to clean it. I have also heard reports that when the extension tube assembly, when you put that all together, I've had people say that the rings don't stay in place, or the main ring that closes down on the connecting the two pieces tends to start to slide up. I experienced a little bit of the larger ring sliding up in the very beginning when I started using the roaster, but after 2 or 3 roasts and continuing to push that down and seat it in place, I haven't had any problems since. So very happy with the extension tube, and I would strongly recommend you consider that. All right, so having said that, if you have an extension tube and you've had problems, I'd like to hear what those issues have been. The SR540 is the baby sister to the 800. There are people with the 800 that are using extension tubes. There's a very popular extension tube called the Razzo, and I would be interested in hearing feedback on how that Razzo influences roasting temperatures and roasting capacity for that roaster. So share your comments. I would love to hear them. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button right now. That is going to help me tremendously. And also, if you are a viewer of my channel but you aren't subscribed, please do that. That really helps me out. I appreciate that. And as always, if you want to be notified, hit the bell icon right now, so the next time I upload a video, you'll be the first to know. All right, it's been a couple days since I roasted this coffee, and I'm excited to taste it. This is a Kenya Kirinyaga Kinumi Peaberry. Tasting notes on this coffee are a syrupy sweetness. There is a red grapefruit, a ripe orange, a grape note, and then some spicy aromas. So the coffee's had a chance to cool a little bit, and let's go in for the taste and the smell and see what we find. It's definitely a juicy coffee. It's got a little bit of a tart zing to it. I think that's a grapefruit acidity note that they're talking about. There is a sweetness. I don't know if I would call it a syrupy sweetness. The body is kind of a medium to, yeah, I'd say it's a medium body coffee. And there is definitely some, maybe some other a dark fruit I can't really identify. The tasting notes on this coffee from Sweet Maria's, I think, are really accurate. I mean, I always enjoy Sweet Maria's tasting notes. They're interesting to read, and it helps me kind of try to tune in my palate to see if I can taste any of those notes. So I really appreciate the work that they do. This is really an enjoyable cup of coffee. I think the Fresh Roast did a great job. Along with my roasting profile, I was able to nail each of the events, so I'm really happy with that. I would say that the coffee might be a little darker. I was maybe hoping, and maybe a goal should be to try to roast this just a little lighter. I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. I do like the roast time. I wouldn't really want to go too much longer on the roast time with this coffee, but I'll do a little bit of experimenting. And yeah, if you've roasted a coffee like this, if you've roasted this coffee, I would love to hear what you found and what you ended up as far as tasting notes. That would be really interesting. If you have had some interesting experiences roasting coffee with your Fresh Roast or any air roaster, I would be interested in that. If you've done modifications to a stock roaster, it doesn't have to be an air roaster, and you have done that to improve its overall roast capability, whether it's for evenness or whether it's to help enhance the temperatures to speed up the roast or to slow the roast down, share those with me. I saw somebody recently that was working with a standard hot air popcorn popper. I was actually talking to this person, and I looked at what they did, and they created their own extension tube for the roasting chamber of a hot air popper. It was really interesting. I think they used a tin can or something like that. Have you ever done anything like that? Share those in the comments as well. So I really appreciate you guys watching this video. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we will see you the next time here at the Virtual Coffee Lab. I hope you have a great week roasting. See you next time.